All right. This is probably not a typical message that you're used to hearing me preach. I don't need no help. I got this. All right, I got this. That's all right. No, you can help if you want. But yeah, this is not a typical message that I would normally preach, but I think it's an important message. I really don't ever preach anything that I don't think is important because I pray about it and I believe it's what God gives us. But a lot of my illustrations, my notes that I am using, I want to give credit to Sam Chan because he wrote a book, and I have not read the entire book, but it's called Cracking Your Church's Culture Code. All right, and culture is a huge deal in churches today. It don't matter if you've got 20 people in the church or 1,000 people in the church. You have a church culture, and a lot of times the culture is what runs people off or keeps people there. All right, they say that people decide within the first 5 minutes of being in the church if they're ever coming back again. So I feel like that takes a lot of pressure off of me because it doesn't matter if I'm the best preacher in the world. Even if they stay for the remainder of the service, they're not going to hear half the stuff I say because they've already made up their mind within the first 5 minutes of being inside the church that they're not coming back again. So it's important for us to establish a good culture that feels welcoming, that feels warm. If we want people to continue to visit or to maybe eventually make this their church home. So I'm going to talk about 5 different churches today. I'm going to talk about, the first one I'm going to talk about is an inspiring type of church. And there's a slide. Inspiring, all right? Hopefully y'all realize that this is an Indy car track, all right? And I'm going to use roads today to describe these types of churches, okay? So I'm going to do my best, all right? But an inspiring church, that really should be the goal. That should be the culture that we should be striving to create within our church, is an inspiring church, all right? An inspiring church, if you compare it to an Indy car track, it's smooth and you can go fast on it, all right? There's no bumps in the road. There's no potholes. There's no dangers. I guess you can consider it dangerous because they're going extremely fast, but you can move fast and it is smooth. This type of church is wide open. All right, they're wide open and they're moving right along. They're doing missions and they're doing things in the community and they're helping people and they're just constantly growing. All right, the people in the church, they don't get offended at suggestions. You know, people come in and bring new ideas and new suggestions. People don't give the attitude like, who in the world you think you are? I've been here for 50 years and you just come in here and offer up some new suggestions. Nope, they don't get offended because everybody is valued. Creativity is rewarded in a church like this. If you're creative, it's rewarded. And failure is viewed as a stepping stone for growth. All right? So failure is not looked at something as something negative. It's looked at something as positive. You know, when you fail, you learn from your failure. I tell, when I was coaching, I tell the girls a lot of times that, and it's a saying from Tim Tebow, he said, failure is only temporary. All right? Regret will last you a lifetime. So failure is only temporary. You don't even remember it once you've learned from it and moved on. You don't even remember it. All right. So failure is not viewed as a negative, but it's viewed as a positive. All right. There are no turf battles within an inspiring church. Okay. People aren't fight. This is my church. All right. And you haven't made it your church yet, so Don't think you can come in here and do whatever you want, all right? There's no fight between the leadership. Well, I'm an elder of the church, and you're just a congregational member that comes on Sundays, all right? There's no type of wars like that within a church like this. This church is built off of respect and trust. The congregational members, they respect each other, they trust each other, they respect their leaders. In a church like Ames, the leaders are myself, the elders, and then the members of the board, all right? But there should be a respect for those members because they're giving time out of their lives to ensure that the organizational part of this church functions well, all right? And we should trust that they are keeping the interest of the community and this church at hand, all right? So a church that's inspiring, they trust and respect each other. The attitude of the church is that we are all in this together. It's not me against you, Cindy. It's not me against Leah or anybody else. It's we're all working towards one goal. One goal. To reach the lost, to save the lost, to introduce people to Jesus Christ. All right? We're all in this together. There's no division. And success stories are celebrated frequently in a church like this. All right? People, when you're thriving, when you're moving fast like this and you're going, people are experiencing the blessings of the Lord. And every time a testimony like that has come, they want people to come up and tell those stories because other people need to hear those stories, and it helps them, and then that person gets the story of their own. So these stories become, these success stories become celebrated, and it's something that's often heard in the church. The next church I want to talk about is an accepting church. Accepting church. All right? It's a smooth road. All right, country road. I tried to do an accepting church and find a smooth road in Oklahoma, and all I could find was a picture that said, "Welcome to Oklahoma." I couldn't find any churches, any roads with smooth roads in Oklahoma. So I don't know what that's all about. I'm lying. I know what that's about. All right, but. Yeah, so I had to go with this picture, but it's a smooth road, okay? You could still go fast on it. There might be some curves in it, all right? There might be some potholes. Every now and then you're going to have to slow down just to avoid a pothole, all right? Or avoid a bump in the road, okay? But you can still go fast in an accepting church, all right? This church usually has a positive attitude, but there are some difficult decisions that need to be made and sometimes get avoided, all right? And because they get avoided, because we don't want to hurt nobody, it's an accepting church. We don't hurt nobody's feelings, so these decisions kind of get avoided, and because they get avoided, they create tensions in the church, okay? But still a good church, still a good church. They're moving right along, doing God's work. The church typically has clear goals, all right? The church knows where they're going. They know what they want to establish. They know what they want to reach, okay? And it has strong relationships. Strong relationships. A church like this, in a small community like this, there should be some strong relationships out there because many of you have grown up and known each other. Some of you have known some of the members in this church since they were crawling around on the floor. All right, so there should be some strong relationships. The church has a good reputation in the community. The community looks at that church and says, man, they really try to help people. All right, they really are trying to live a Christ-like life. They're really trying to do some awesome things, okay? The type of people that a church like this attracts are people that maybe they're not as spiritually healthy as people in an inspiring church, but they are always working towards being more and more spiritually minded, more and more are grounded in the Word. So they're striving for that. They're still moving forward, okay? They're working on it, all right? The church, they spend a lot of time developing people, okay? So even though their people might not be as spiritually minded or healthy as the Inspiring Church, this Accepting Church spends a lot of time developing those people so that they can be like the Inspiring Church, all right? And this church is focused on growth. They're focused on growth and acceptance, all right? Come as you are, we accept you. Accepting people who they are, where they are. It doesn't matter if you don't look like we look. Just come as you are, and we accept you. The next church, now those first two churches are pretty good churches, all right? One's really good, the other one's pretty good, all right? But the next church and the two after that, not so good. Now we're starting to slump. And you probably can think while I'm talking about a couple of churches that you're like, oh, I know something like that. But the next one's called stagnant. And stagnant is like a dirt road, okay? It's in the middle. I told you I'm going to talk about 5. It's in the middle, all right? It's not completely bad, but it has more bad than it has good, all right? You know a dirt road, and some of you, I think everybody here, except for Tristan, has a truck, all right? So you got a truck, you're going down the dirt road, you could get a little fast. You still get going down it pretty good. But there's still a lot more dangers involved. You hit some gravel the wrong way. I don't know about y'all. Y'all should know, when it rains a lot of times, if it's rained enough and enough vehicles have went down there, you get those little grooves in the road, and it catches your truck. I always used to have fun on it because it just make me get all over the place and everything like that. But if you're going too fast, you might find yourself in a ditch, all right? I know most of you are like, that's no big deal. I got 4-wheel drive. I'll get out of the ditch. But you still, nevertheless, will find yourself in a ditch if you're not careful. These churches usually start out strong. They start out strong. They're guns a-blazing, but over time, they lose their energy. Over time, they lose their energy and they become stagnant, okay? You got people that they come to the church, they're really excited about their new church home, and they're really wanting to strive and do things in the church. What can I do to help? What can I do to help? Hey, can I teach a Sunday school or something? And then over time, they just lose that energy because nobody else wants to help. Nobody else wants to support them. Someone wants to have a Sunday school class, but nobody shows up. Someone wants to do a small group, but nobody shows up. So you can see after a while of doing things and nobody else helping, it dies. And they lose their energy and they become stagnant. All right? You are only valued in a church that's stagnant if you are producing. All right? So the people that are producing the most have the most value to them. Or the church considers them valuable. All right? Which that's understandable too. I'm not knocking it completely. There's the 80-20 rule. 20% of the population is doing 80% of the work. Okay, and it's sad, but that's usually how it ends. But those people that are willing to sacrifice and to work, you do kind of hold a little more value to them, because you definitely don't want to see them go, because then you end up with 10% of the people doing 90% of the work. So team members tolerate their leaders, but they do not trust or respect them. All right? So they tolerate the minister. They're like, I guess he preaches a pretty good sermon, so we'll let him hang around a little longer. But they don't trust him, and they don't respect him. All right? They say things like this: oh, that's just Bob, and Bob's just Bob. We just tolerate Bob. All right? When I wrote this, I was not thinking of Bob, but you just happened to be there, Bob. But yes, they say things like, oh, that's just Bob, and we all just put up with Bob. The people tend to protect their turf. They're very protective of what is theirs. I've been sitting on this side of church in this pew for I don't know how long, and you need to get out of my seat, all right? It's much more than just that, but you have leaders fighting over, well, I think we should do it this way because we've always done it this way, and new leaders like, oh, maybe we should remove that, or maybe we should turn the pews around and face the other. I'm sorry, I'm just talking, all right? I'm not trying to get crazy on you, you know, or knock down a wall or something. They're very protective of their turf, of their church. They fight for power and they limit communication, all right? So there's always a struggle for who's in charge, all right? And they limit communication. You think about it, it's like, it's just that way because I said it's that way, and that's the end of discussion. Well, I don't want to talk about it anymore. So even if there was a chance that we could work through something, we're not going to do it because we're not going to talk about it. That's just the way it is. All right? Complaining becomes the norm. Does anybody in here know somebody that all they do is complain? I don't want you to point at anybody, okay? But I mean in your everyday life, not necessarily inside the church. You know, those people complain. After a while, that complaining, it don't even really affect you. I don't like to be around people that complain. But after a while, being around someone that complains a lot, you just kind of get like, oh, that's all they ever do. And then you kind of ignore it. It don't even affect you anymore. It just becomes the norm, all right? There's a lot of blame, and there's no responsibility in the church. It's your fault, all right? It's your fault, Kevin. It's Bo's fault, all right? And nobody wants to say, you know what, I probably could have handled that differently, all right? Nobody wants to take responsibility for themselves. The worst of all about a stagnant church, the worst of all thing is that it's a church that is they're happy with being status quo. They're happy with reaching this level right here and staying there. Like, we've always had 40 members, we're always going to keep 40 members. That's just the way it is. Or we've always done it this way, we're going to keep doing it this way. And it's always worked before, and it's just going to keep working that. And they're just happy with being right here. That's the worst thing. Status quo. The next church that I want to talk about is discouraging. Discouraging church. I don't know if y'all have ever been here. I seen a Ford one time that was like this. And I was trying to get over there real quick with my Chevy to pull it out because I wanted to take a picture of a Chevy pulling a Ford out of the mud, but someone else had already offered help before I could get there. But yes, this is a muddy road, all right? You get stuck in the mud. You have a whole lot of problems in a church like this. The church sucks the life right out of you, all right? It sucks the life right out of its people, okay? You become like a zombie type congregation. We're just going to come in, we're just going to do our announcements, do communion and offering and sing a few songs and let the preacher say his thing, and then we're going to go home and do our same normal thing throughout the week, and then come back again on Sunday and do it all over again. All right? It's just we're going through the motions type thing. All right? A church like this has unresolved problems. They have this side of the church is fighting with this side of the church, and they're not going to talk about it, first of all, like the stagnant church. So they just go unresolved. And because of those unresolved problems, they become, there's a lot of unhealed wounds in the church. All right? They're cuts. They're just open, just festering. All right? And they never become healed. Someone said something, hurt my feelings. I didn't like what the preacher said that last week. All right? So they just stay open. And we all know that if you don't tend to, if it's a bad enough wound and you don't tend to it, you could lose an arm. If I had a cut on my arm, it was deep enough or whatnot, and I didn't do anything to fix it. Go to the doctor, any stitches, alcohol or whatever, if I didn't do anything, any bandages like that, I could eventually, it could get infected. I could lose my arm. But these churches have unresolved problems, and they end up having a lot of unhealed wounds. And then on top of that, you've got 2 or 3 people in the entire church that run everything. They got their hands on everything, all right? It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's Sunday school, whether it's the board, whether it's preaching. They've got their hands on everything. And those 2 or 3 people have more power than anybody else in the church. There's a sense of entitlement from the people that have been there the longest or write the biggest checks. And self-preservation and self-protection become prevalent in a church like this. Me, me, me. I am more important than anyone else. Me, myself, and I. My wants, my desires, my likes, my dislikes. Me, 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 me are more important than yours. And there's no room for God. It's more about what I want and not what God wants in the church. People that are the problem never see themselves as the problem. The last church that I want to talk about is a toxic church. So when I was trying to find this picture, a bridge, a washed out bridge, okay? Something that you couldn't get across. And I found a couple, and every time I found it, I was like, I got some guys in here with their 4-wheel drive pickups. They'd be like, I can get across that. So I had to find one that I felt like there's no way you can get across this, all right? It's closed. It's a closed off system. A church that is toxic has a closed off system. It's kind of like that country club feeling that I've talked about before. It's us and there's no room for nobody else, all right? If you're not a part of it, then you need to find another place to go, another church to worship. There are no new ideas allowed. Don't you dare come in here with a good idea. Don't come in here with new advice like, wouldn't it be better if we lowered the lights or anything like that? Don't you dare, all right? The church breeds bad ideas, bad behaviors, and bad values. Just like the paper I sent out today or gave you guys. Their values, probably none of their values are on this list. All right? They just don't have good values. They don't understand. They don't want a Christ likeness in the church. They don't value faith in the church. They don't value people or flexibility or fun in the church. They don't value acceptance in the church. All right? They just have bad values, bad behaviors, and bad ideas. When I think of bad behaviors, I think about a child throwing a tantrum. All right? My buddy, I remember one time he told his son no, and his son dropped to his hands and knees and drug himself. He wasn't even moving his knees. He drug himself across the floor with his hands into the cabinet door and then started banging his head on the door, all right? I see that a lot when I think of people inside of a toxic church. We're just throwing a bunch of tantrums, okay? But people are expected to do as they're told in a church like this. Fear is what dominates the organization. Is I'm the pastor, I'm the elder, I'm the board member, and if you don't like it, you can just go somewhere else, right? The leaders in the church dump on each other. There's no unity amongst the leaders. They just dump on each other. They talk about each other behind each other's backs. They talk about each other to the congregation. They just dump on each other. Excuse me. This church will run off good people and welcome naive and desperate people. We don't want any good people in this church, so they're going to run off the good people and welcome naive and desperate. Why would they welcome naive and desperate people? Basically, it's a church that wants people that they can control. If you're naive, if you're desperate, we can control you. So here's the question. Here's the question of the day. What kind of culture would you say, I want you to ask yourself this, would you say that we are creating here at Ames Christian Church? What kind of culture? Or maybe some of you, we've already created a culture here. All right? What kind of culture would you say we're creating or we have created here at Ames Christian Church? I really want us as a church, all right, to be honest with ourselves. Okay? Honest and find out what our true reality is. What do people say when they come to Ames Christian Church for the first time? What is our true reality? I heard a man say one time, he said, you cannot change what you do not acknowledge. So, a lot of churches, one thing that the stagnant, the discouraging, and the toxic church do, they're not acknowledging what their problems are. That's why status quo is the acceptance in the one. So you can't change something unless you've acknowledged the problem. If we take a really hard look at ourselves and we find out that we have some of the same characteristics. Now, I'm not saying we're a stagnant church. I'm not saying we're discouraging or toxic. But what if we find that, I thought there was certain things from each one of those churches that we have here at Ames Christian Church. If we take a look at ourselves and we find that we have some of the same characteristics as stagnant, discouraging, or even toxic church culture, then what steps can we take to begin to change our culture and become more like the accepting or the inspiring church? Now, I do want to tell you, I heard a man preach along the same lines as this about the 5 different churches, and he said that, and he was a guy that was what he did. He went and planted churches. He started new churches and stuff. And he said the best he's ever done was accepting church. All right? That was the best church culture he could ever reach. He never actually reached Inspire. Now, that's not an excuse for us here at Ames if we are accepting or we reach accepting, that we're like, oh, we're good. No, we should always be striving to reach that better type of church culture. But accepting was the best that this minister said he could ever reach. We really need to take a good look at our culture, at the culture that we are creating, and then ask ourselves one thing. And if you hadn't heard anything else I said today, I want you to hear this. What is important? What is the most important thing to us? When we consider our culture, what is the most important thing to us? Now, y'all didn't think I was going to let y'all get out of here with me preaching a whole sermon with no scriptures, right? So let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Starting with the 19th verse. Paul wrote this. He said, though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone, to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under law. I'm not under that law, but I became as one that was under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to, I'm going to wait for him to get it up there. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some, just a little bit, just one, just two. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, so that I may share in some of its blessings, or in its blessings. There it is. If you didn't catch it in that scripture, there it is. When I ask you, ask yourself, what is the most important thing to us? If you didn't catch it, the answer is right there. It should be people. Not just the people in here, but the people out there. That should be the most important thing. Do you think it was difficult? Do you think it was difficult for Paul to constantly be changing the way he was to reach some? To win some for Christ? I imagine it was incredibly, it had to be a roller coaster ride. Today I'm weak. Today I'm one that doesn't have a law. Today I'm as a Jew. Today I'm as a Gentile. But he related to the people in the position that they were at in their life to try and win them for Christ. It's not easy to change. One of the hardest things for a Christian today to do is change. I told this joke. Nobody laughed every time I told it, but I'll try it with you guys. How many Christians does it take to change a light bulb? Did someone say change? Nope, it still sucks. All right. So, I'm going to take that one out of my joke book, okay? But change is hard for Christians, okay? It's hard for Christians to do. But if we want to do God's work, someone came up one time and said, who is responsible to the pastor? Who is responsible for these changes? And he looked at her and he said, God is. What do you mean? Look around you. There's nothing in your life that hasn't changed. Nothing in your life that hasn't changed. The seasons change. The earth has changed. God is about change. You have changed. That baby, 40 years from now, if he be so lucky, he will look like Pastor does, all right? He will change. Okay? He will grow into a man. It has been said that culture, not vision, not strategy, but culture is the most powerful factor in a church organization. The culture is. That's the 5 minutes. That's what people come in. And in the first 5 minutes, they see the culture. That's what welcomes them in. Is our culture holding us back from reaching the lost? Is our culture holding us back from reaching God's people? Is it holding us back from doing God's will? If we truly want to grow, if we truly want to keep this 115-year-old church going, not just going at a pace that is considered status quo, but thriving, but working hard, then we're going to have to loosen our grip. We're going to have to loosen it just a little bit and start looking for an effective way to change our culture. We have to loosen our grip just a little bit and start looking for these ways to change our culture, to become a more inviting church to those who don't know God, to those who need God. Last week I showed a video and it said, how much do you have to hate someone to believe in a place like heaven or hell and not tell them about it? You might not hate anybody, but Really think about that. How much do you have to hate them to not tell? We've got to change our culture to where we want people to know that there is a heaven and a hell, and there is a God who gave his life on the cross so that we could live. We've got to change our culture that it invites people in and that they will want to know something better than what they already know. What are we going to do? What are we going to do to change the culture? I know this church has a culture, and I hope I'm going to let you guys figure it out over the next few weeks for yourself, what you think about the culture of this church. We've been around for 150, I did the math. If I'm wrong, sorry. 115 years. There is a culture here. Can we do better? That's all I'm asking. Can we do better? Let's pray.